8:30, and the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee will be called to order. First on our agenda, do we have any bill requests? Okay, I do not see any. I do know we have one. Senator Clays will be coming in sometime. He got caught up at another meeting, so he might, at the end of our meeting, we might have an introduction. So with that, we are going to go in and open up the hearing on Senate Bill 42 concerning the study and investigation of maternal deaths in the state of Kansas. And to give the bill overview, Jenna Moyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 42 would expand the investigative duties of the Secretary of KDHE regarding cases of maternal death. This bill amends existing law in KSA 65-177. And for your personal reference, a maternal death is already defined, and it means a death of any woman from any cause while pregnant or within 1 calendar year of the end of the pregnancy, regardless of the duration of the pregnancy or the site where the pregnancy would end. And there are a couple provisions in this law that extend confidentiality. I will deal with all those at the end. But the meat of the bill is on page 2, beginning in subsection C, that would expand the duties of the Secretary of Health and Environment, adding a duty to utilize a social determinants of health review form is number 5. Number 9 would be to work with healthcare providers and healthcare facilities to promote the continuity of maternal health care for women both during and after pregnancy. The new paragraph 10 would be to help healthcare providers and healthcare facilities develop and implement performance measures based on performance measures in accordance with the Maternal and Child Health Services Block Grant. Number 11 would be to strengthen the ability of local health officers to generate and compile maternal healthcare performance indicators and to establish an external community review committee. And then there are 3 or 4 instances in which confidentiality provisions are extended. If you may remember that every year there's a bill that extends exceptions to open records confidentiality, and we typically extend them every 5 years, and this bill would go in and extend some of the existing confidentiality exclusions from 2023 until 2026, and they are essentially when the Secretary of Health and Environment does a study of a maternal death, it would involve the autopsy, the coroner's report, the medical records, and then the opinions and documents testimony related to that investigation, and it would make sure that those documents would be excluded from public records requests. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. Oh, and I just should mention that this is a carryover bill from last year, so that if this bill were to be worked, we would have a technical amendment to extend the dates and so forth.
Jenna, thank you very much for that explanation. Committee, do we have any questions for Jenna? Okay, not seeing any. We will now move to proponents. Our first proponent will be Senator Aletha Foscato. Senator, welcome to our committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, Ranking Member, and the other esteemed members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, first off, thank you so much for this opportunity to have the hearing today on Senate Bill 42, which I stand in strong support of. As the reviser shared, this bill was introduced last session, in session 2021. And so the individuals who support the legislation, we really appreciate that we are here today before your committee. Mr. Chairman, my testimony, as you'll see, is the statement of the story of Charmaine. Last year when the legislation was introduced, it gave Rita Williams Thompson, it gave her the courage to come out and tell her story. It's actually on YouTube. Cake News aired her story when she And Mr. Chairman, actually, she and I went to junior high school together, so I've known Rita. However, I never knew that she experienced this situation, as you can read in here, but I'll just be brief on her points, was that she would have died and her daughter would have died had she not had a supportive family that said, you know, no, keep going back and forth to the doctor and telling your story, because initially she shared her that she knew something was wrong in her body, but the doctors just kept sending her back home saying, you're okay, you're okay. Her daughter was born, but her daughter never really, on the picture that you'll see, I think is attached to here, she finally got to be of this size. Initially, there are other pictures where she shared that her daughter could only wear doll clothes, clothes for a doll. And her daughter was cared for in a facility until she passed away. As you'll see, she passed away on February 17th of 2021. And so Rita could not be with us today. She had to work, but she just called me this morning, and she said her final statement would be to be an advocate for your own health and ask questions. And she is supportive of Senate Bill 42 and asked that the committee consider the passage of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, are you going to stick around?
Yes.
Okay, we'll hold questions until the end then, if that's okay. Committee, our next proponent testimony is Sapphire Elise Garcia, President of the Wichita Birth Justice Society. Sapphire, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning. I, like you, am a proud Kansan, and the work that I've done has taken me all over our beautiful state, from the inner city neighborhoods of Wichita and Kansas City to the smallish Amish homes in Garnett, Kansas. And I've wiped the sweat off many a brow, held many hands while women give birth to their babies. And one thing that I can tell you, Senator Hildebrand and others, is that families in Kansas are scared. Husbands are having conversations with their wives during pregnancy about what they should do during the delivery if a complication arises and he has to choose between her life or the baby's. I don't think that conversation should ever have to occur. And I can tell you myself, in 2016, during the birth of my youngest child, I had a life-threatening pregnancy complication that was undetected my entire pregnancy. It was placenta accreta. What that is where the placenta grows through the walls of the womb, and it can attach to other organs. And in many cases, it's fatal, especially in cases like mine, where nobody knew. There, but for the grace of God, I stand before you today alive and able to tell my story. But for too many Kansans, Mom didn't get to come home. She didn't get to come home to her kids and rock them to sleep at night the way I did with mine last night. And that breaks my heart. And I think it breaks your heart too. I think that the best thing that we can do for families in Kansas right now who are worried, families like mine, families like Rita's, is we can support Senate Bill 42. What this does is it makes important changes to the system we already have in place to review these maternal deaths. It gives us more tools. And even more importantly, it brings more voices to the table. Voices like mine, voices like Dr. Smith's. Without those voices, without all of us on board to tackle this heartbreaking crisis, a lot of moms won't live to see next year. I want you to consider today, when you look at Senate Bill 42, how you would feel and what you would do if your wife or your sister or your neighbor didn't make it home from the hospital when she went in to have a baby. How would that make you feel? I think all of us universally, no matter our race, class, or creed, can say that Kansas moms are important. They're worth fighting for. And so I ask you wholeheartedly to support Senate Bill 42 for the future of Kansas moms, Kansas babies, and Kansas families. We must and we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sapphire, for your testimony. Committee, next we have Charla Smith, PhD, MPH, Assistant Professor at KU Med Center. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Greetings, Chairperson Hildebrand, Senator Olathe Foscato, and members of this esteemed committee. Thank you for this opportunity. Can you hear me? I can talk now. Thank you. Greetings, Senator Chairperson Hildebrand, Senator Olathe Foscato, and members of this esteemed committee. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Charla Smith, and I am Director and founder of the Kansas Birth Equity Network. I'm here because I'm a mother and an advocate for Black women and all women who deliver babies in the state of Kansas. I am here because you've already shown that you're concerned because you're here to listen. I'm here because each one of us in this room understands the role and responsibility of a mother, either because we are a mother, we had a mother, we have a wife and children, or we've witnessed the love, the unconditional love demonstrated by a mother. I stand here today to ask you to support us and help us identify the causes of death of all mothers. We must do our best to protect Kansas women because they are the staples of our community. If maternal mortality in Kansas is an indicator of women ages 18 to 44 and the health of Kansas families, then we should and can do better to make sure that no mother dies of a pregnancy-related death. The Kansas mortality rate between 2013 and 2017 was 22.4 per 100,000. That's 30% higher than the Healthy People 2020 goal. This means, while it looks like a small number, what it means is 22 families were without a mother. 22 husbands lost their wives. 22 children were not taken care of. 22 mothers lost their daughter. 22 fathers lost their daughter. And when we talk about the racial disparities, that's 69 deaths. 69 babies of color were without their mother. 69 husbands were without their wives. And 69 mothers were without their daughter. And 69 fathers were without their daughter. 22 and 69 are too much. In Kansas, I tell you as a proud Kansas, I stand here to tell you we care about all women. We care about all families. So the question is, why are we not concerned about these women? Most importantly, our economics are affected by the loss. Without mothers and without the family structure, these families are unstable and they don't boost our Kansas economy. These deaths do not come without cost. It is estimated that the total maternal morbidity cost for the U.S. in 2019 was $32.3 billion. And that was 29 deaths per 100,000. If we're at 22, then those numbers are applicable to our Kansas economy. While we're aware of the racial disparities, what we need to recognize is that these are human beings. These are people. These are Kansans. These are people we care about. No Kansas woman should die of a preventable death, and no Kansan should have to worry about dying of childbirth. However, we cannot assure that in Kansas. We cannot assure that women survive if we don't thoroughly examine the deaths. We must know the causes of these deaths. We must have committees that examine these deaths, these preventable deaths. 60% of maternal mortality is preventable, and we can prevent that. We can save money, and we can save families. It is our one and only option to minimize these deaths is to thoroughly review them. And I ask you, if these things could be implemented at the state level, why are we discussing them today? Why has it not been implemented to date? Why haven't we done this? How can we work together to improve this, to improve the health of mothers? This bill will allow us to know that every woman in Kansas, why every woman in Kansas dies during birth, examine more thoroughly the social determinants of health associated with these deaths, and develop metrics and support continuity of care for all women. Today, I ask you to support SB 42, this bill, and make the decision to review and vote on it for every Kansas woman, for every Kansas father, and for every Kansas child. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Committee, our next conferee is Stacy Noel, Executive Director for the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. Stacy, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Chairperson Hildebrand and the members of the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee. My name is Stacy Noel, and I am the Executive Director of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. But this morning, I'm here specifically as my role as a Black mother in the state of Kansas. Both of my pregnancies were considered high risk. I was over 35, and I had undergone surgeries previously on my uterus to remove fibroids, and that had prevented me from becoming pregnant earlier. I remember my obstetrician telling me very explicitly I was not to go into labor. She scheduled me for a cesarean section at week 39 to make sure that she got to me before the baby decided to make an appearance. And my first child arrived one snowy day in 2016, happy and healthy. But then I was one fibroid surgery and one cesarean section into my second pregnancy, so I was considered even higher risk for hemorrhage and, of course, pregnancy complications. The doctors watched me closely. Another delivery was scheduled at week 39, and my second child arrived screaming, just like her sister. I recall clear as day the voice of an attending nurse as I laid on that table, the scene hidden from me by that blue screen. She's bleeding. By then, I had heard the statistics about maternal mortality. I knew that childbirth was a leading cause of death for women outside the United States. And in the United States, it remained a top 10 cause of death among Black women. Pregnancy complications, they call it. With those two words, she's bleeding, I feared that I would become just another statistic in the long line of Black women who died in childbirth. Now, obviously, it's clear I survived, but I had chosen my OB because she was a woman of color. The delivery team worked on me to stop my bleeding, and she checked on me several times in the following days to ensure my recovery. My heart breaks for the story that Senator Foscato told about how the doctors discounted what she was saying. I had chosen my doctor because she was a woman of color, and she followed up on me. And I know that that was out of the norm because my first pregnancy was fine, and she didn't follow up on me. She didn't come to my room several days afterward, but with the second one, she did. I survived my pregnancy complications, but a horrifying number of Black women don't. The statistics reflect maternal mortality in Kansas. The statistics that reflect the maternal mortality in Kansas are sobering and demand attention. That's why I'm here to strenuously support Senate Bill 42 that would allow the Kansas Department of Health and Environment to look into any and all cases of maternal death, specifically with an eye on the race of the mother and any social determinants of health that may come into play. Thank you for giving this bill consideration. I almost said I pray that you would really put it into play, but it really is that deep. I pray that you would put it into play. As a Black woman who has heard those words on the delivery table that I was bleeding, I did fear for my life at that point. And my husband and I did have conversations knowing that my pregnancy was high risk. This idea, we had made a deal. I'm going to get emotional thinking about it. We had made a deal. If something goes wrong, we had decided you go with the baby. If I die, you follow the baby. We had had that conversation. So this is a real thing, and I really do hope that you would work this bill. Thank you.
Stacy, thank you for your testimony. Committee, our last scheduled oral proponent is Lucretia Noel, Public Policy Specialist for the Kansas Catholic Conference. Lucretia, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, Chairperson Hildebrand and members of the committee. My name is Lucretia Noel. I'm the Public Policy Specialist with the Kansas Catholic Conference, where I represent the Catholic Bishops of Kansas. You have in front of you my testimony, and as you can see, we are a proponent of Bill SB 42, We support this bill because the Catholic Church recognizes the values of families, and mothers and children are a huge part of those families. You know, there's an old saying that fathers are the head of the family, but mothers are the heart. And when you lose that heart, that makes a huge impact on families, especially children, ones that will last a lifetime. You know, I've been blessed personally to have my mother with me my entire life, but my grandma was not as fortunate. She actually lost her mother when she was a teenager, and I saw the impact this had on her my entire life. Now imagine if she would have lost her mother as a young child or as an infant. Children need their mothers to guide, love, and support them through life, which is why we support the goal of Bill SB 42 to help obtain the knowledge as to why the mother mortality rate is high in order to help address the cause and find a resolution to this problem. We see that this is an important discussion, and we hope to continue to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Lucretia, thank you very much for your testimony. This does conclude our oral proponents. Is there anybody else wishing to provide proponent testimony? Okay, not seeing any. Committee, I would direct your attention to the written only. Heather Braum, Health Policy Advisor for Kansas Action for Children. Jenny Tolan, BSN, RN, CLC, Co-Executive Director of the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition. Tracy Russell, Executive Director for Nurture KC. McLean G. Macklin, Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives, Health Forward Foundation. And Melody McCrae Miller, Wichita Birth Justice Society. At this time, we will open it up for proponent testimony. Or questions. So Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had two questions. Has this been implemented in other states, and what is the investigation finding, and is that helping change the landscape?
And if you would, as a reminder, just state your name and who you represent before you answer. Thank you.
I am Charlotte Smith, and I represent the Kansas Birth. I am Charlotte Smith. I'm not tall enough for the mic, and I represent the Kansas Birth Equity Network. Yes, this has been implemented in several states to have the social determinants of health form included, particularly in Chicago. They review the social determinants of health, not just to look at race, but to look at substance abuse and domestic violence. And so they're able to identify those cases and determine how to deflect them. And so they have been able today to save $5 billion for that state, and to also deflect over 22 deaths per year. And I'd be happy to share, I've talked with the director, I'd be happy to share that. Now Ohio is implementing that review of social determinants of health in their form to really examine what's happening in these deaths. Now they don't have any data to date because they have just implemented this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question. This was touched on a little bit, but with the disparity with race, what has that been like for Kansas in terms of numbers and?
Great question. So in Kansas, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die of maternal death compared to white women. And they also have higher death rates compared to Hispanic women. And a lot of that is due to what we see in Kansas is due to hypertension. Preeclampsia. So preeclampsia is a disease that is a part of hypertension. So hypertension is a component of preeclampsia, and then it's eclampsia, which is bleeding. And hypertension is actually treated with 81 milligrams of aspirin, but it goes undetected most often, not just in Black women, in all pregnant women we see this issue. We see gestational diabetes, which are things that happen. Now remember, with hypertension, a woman's blood pressure goes down when she becomes pregnant. So then it spikes up around between 16 and 20 weeks. So it has to be in line with the care. And so thus, if we're doing reviews and we find those issues, then we can change care to find that earlier so that we don't fall within that window of 16 to 20 weeks. There's one prenatal visit within that window. And so we have one time to catch that and save a mother. And this also results in high infant mortality rates. So we see that Black infants die at 3 to 4 times that of white infants of low birth weight and preterm birth, which is also caused by maternal morbidity. So if women are healthy, then our infants are healthy.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, thank you and all of you for being here. I would like for you to expound on, and which you just did, but a little bit more, as I was looking at some of the other data, like from Nurture KC, and how will this information that can be now gathered, or more broadly gathered, how will it help when you mentioned social determinants of health? How will it help when we are looking at services that we are providing, or that we need to maybe look at more extensively providing to address these issues?
Yeah, great question. So once we've identified the causes, then we're able to identify how to change care, and we're able to identify how to change and offer services in the community. Sapphire Lease is a doula, and doulas have been very successful in helping to improve pregnancy-related outcomes. And so because we have to look at that to see what are the causes. Once we identify the causes, then we're able to change care. For instance, the hypertension that I talked about, or maybe it's that they need more prenatal visits, or maybe they need access to services. But we won't know that until we identify what's happening in their community. How are they accessing services? Do they get community services? Do they have a doula? Do they get the services that are needed that the state offers? Do they start prenatal care early? Why? Is it health insurance? What happens when they go to their visit? What is happening around that? What are their income rates? What are their education? We see that amongst Black women that oftentimes social determinants of health don't help. Like Black women from the wealthiest communities still have babies of a lower birth weight than white women from the poorest communities, and Hispanic women from the poorest communities. So we have to look deeper into what's happening when they receive care, but what's happening also in their community. What are they experiencing that's different? Where's the stress coming from? Things like that. But we have to dig deeper to really identify the causes, and then we can recommend changes in the care and changes in the service.
Just as a follow-up, do you think that having this information, looking at maternal and infant mortality, that it will help not only with determining what kind of prenatal care needs to be provided, but also postpartum care?
Yes, most definitely. What we are seeing a 60% increase in postpartum deaths related to preeclampsia, and so that would help most often to try to figure out what's happening in postpartum period. When I talk to the doctors that I work with, they say they don't see these problems within that 6 to 8 week window. They don't see postpartum depression until 3 months after, maybe 6 months after. They don't see these conditions, these medical outcomes, until long after their final visit. If they are on Medicaid, that visit is between 6 to 8 weeks, and they're seeing these outcomes 6 months, 3 months, 12 months after. And so we have to have that to help with postpartum care. We have to be able to improve that.
Thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Doctor. I guess I'm trying to figure out, this affects all women. I have daughters that had preeclampsia problems and things like that. And I guess what my question is, what's missing now that needs to be added in, what kind of data are you looking for that will help to improve things? And you sort of laid it out, but it was very broad. I mean, what don't we know now that we need to know?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is it's very difficult to find maternal mortality data in the state of Kansas. I found my data on American Health Rankings. website. It's very difficult to even find the numbers in Kansas unless you use the national numbers. So the first thing we need to know is what are the true disparities? We need to know that from our state because we trust our state more, right? And the other thing we need to know are what are the causes? And once we know the causes and we know the true disparities, because maybe the disparity isn't race, maybe the disparity is access to care. Maybe the disparity is income. But we don't know that because we don't have the data in hand. And so we need more aggregated data to be able to identify what the issues are so that we could change, in our system, we could change care. We could change services. We could advocate for all women. This is affecting all women. But we can't change that because we don't know what the true causes are.
So you're really asking for a database to be developed?
I'm
with
asking
this
for
kind of a-
data, but then once we need the data, that's one step. But we also need to review these cases to determine what the factors are. And that means digging deeper and having more representation at the table. And representation can mean those that are highly impacted by this. If 60% of our deaths are preventable, then can't we prevent them?
Sure,
And-
yeah. And this is for across the spectrum of
Yes.
voters, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here and sharing your story. I very much believe that as our families go, the strength of our families determine how our community goes, how our state goes, our schools, and our nation. So I believe that is the foundation of all. And so anything I think we can do to strengthen the family is a positive thing. To that end, I've been around a long time. It's a little concerning to me that we're still dealing with this. Honestly, we've heard about these discrepancies for a long time, and the fact that we haven't really dug in, and here we are, is a little concerning to me. Couple of things. We've heard a lot of information, so it seems like there's a lot of information out there, and I think Senator Thompson touched on this. Is it a matter of just access or the way that the information is? We just need to have it in a form that is more directly related to this issue? And secondly, Doctor, or whoever wants to answer, if 60% are preventable, where did that information come from? What are some of the issues that are preventable? Why aren't we acting on that? I agree, we need to look at this. I'm a little concerned that why aren't the healthcare community, if we know this information, why hasn't it been done without government intervention, I guess, is my question. And so that's kind of a lot, but
That's a
I would
great
appreciate hearing your
I'm
thoughts
going
on
to
that.
ask Sapphire Elise to join me at the podium just because we both have, I will say that there's data out there. The Kansas data is not accessible. It's not accessible to the researchers. It's not accessible to the community. And so we have to know what the data is to access it. I don't even know if we dig deep enough into the data because oftentimes, even when it comes to costs, I looked at the US rates and estimated them for Kansas, but that's not our true rates, and we need to know our true rates, right? We need to know our true disparities, and there's a lot of discrepancy. If you look at the national data versus our data, there's discrepancy in the numbers, there's discrepancy in the disparities, and so we need that data to be accessible to us. We also need performance measures. How are we going to perform better if we don't create measures for ourselves? So that's important as well. We have to create those measures and we have to share them with the care community. We can't leave out our physicians here. And I want to let you know that my system is doing a lot of work to really have birth equity at the heart of everything that we do at KU. So we are working hard, but we're going to need that data that comes from the state to tell us how to do that work, where those causes are, because we're getting it from our KU system, and we're not the only system providing care in the state of Kansas. And so we need that data to help us. The other thing is, why is government intervention is a great question, because we're here because government intervention is needed, and once it's done, no one can then change it. Implementation means I can add on things now, but if administration change in that organization, that changes. But legislative movement means that once that's done legislatively, it's put in place. And this has been done, and many states have been done, and I'd be happy to share that with you, where there has had to be legislation to put in certain policies to protect women and infants in our country, so it's not anything new. As far as preventable causes, as I mentioned, preeclampsia, cardiovascular disease is one of our main causes of infant mortality. And we know by looking at hypertension and 81 milligrams of aspirin, aspirin is $3. So we're asking women to take a $3 medication over the counter. It's covered under our Medicaid, so we know that we care at this state, but we're not identifying the cases early enough. We're not identifying the cases early enough for care. And so that's very minimum, right? That's something we could truly do to prevent things. We have strokes that happen. There's a lot of things, but as far as the medical provision of it, Sapphire's going to speak to that because she helps babies every day and helps to make sure that their delivery is safe.
So as a midwife in training and as a doula who's worked with hundreds of families, I'll tell you that a lot of the factors at play in these deaths aren't going to be things that you find in the chart. It's not going to be the hard data saying what the blood pressure was at 30 weeks. A lot of times it is access to care. It's soft factors, it's community factors. And if we aren't asking the right questions about why these deaths are occurring, how can we ever expect to find the answers? SB 42 helps us ask the right questions.
Quick question before I go to the next senator for a question. You said Kansas data isn't available. You have to get it from the national data points. How does the national get it if Kansas doesn't have it?
So remember, as you're hospitals, so as a hospital association, there is an HCUMP database, and that is where they collect data from all hospitals on deaths. And we do have Medicaid as well, and although that's statewide, it's also national. So a lot of that vital statistic does go to the national level data. CDC holds our vital statistics data. Kansas also holds theirs. Accessing that data has been an issue. Finding those numbers online has been an issue since I've been in Kansas. So it's been very difficult to even get the data to analyze it. And so releasing this data will help us as researchers to really identify the causes and identify strategies and research questions to answer these questions and improve Kansas families' lives. But it is very difficult. If you do a search right now, you will find a major discrepancy in the data. You can respond to that as well.
I think from a personal standpoint, as a Kansan, when I didn't understand the magnitude of this issue, and I went online to look, I'll echo what Dr. Smith has said, the data cannot be found. I think that it's important to have transparency in our state. If we are a state that upholds family values, then an issue this important will be handled with transparency and with the utmost care.
Thank you. Senator Baumgardner, then Senator O'Shea.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. So my first question, I think, would be directed to the Senator Fascadeau. So I know that this is an issue that you're very passionate about, and I'm curious, in your conversations with our former Secretary of the Department of Health, did he give any indication that he or people in his office would get started on this, knowing that the rates, the bad rates were increasing?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Baumgardner, from the information that we've just heard today, I don't think that the previous secretary even had enough information to make a informed decision or implement or move forward, and so therefore didn't say one way or the other. I'm actually astonished by the information that I'm hearing just this morning, and so showing another need why we need to implement Senate Bill 42.
Okay. And I think this might be for Dr. Smith. But as far as data collection, can the collection of the data be done administratively? Who is it that needs to be collecting the data that goes beyond coroner's reports and what the hospitals collect and then go ahead and submit? So some of that very specific sociological, though some of it is physiological data that would need to be collected as well.
Right.
But can that be done administratively? And by which group? Would it be, the OBGYNs? Would it be the hospitals? Would it be the community health officials?
So this data is actually collected by our state health department, KDHE. And it also would be reviewed, those identifiers would be reviewed in our maternal mortality review committee, which I happily serve on. And so those reviews will be done by us and that data points will be collected. While we have the coroner's report and we have physicians on there, we would need to go through and identify what are those causes more thoroughly. And to speak to the question you asked, Senator Olathe Foscato, as a member of the Maternal Mortality Review Committee, there was an attempt to make some changes for that committee. We now have a subcommittee. However, that subcommittee does not operate as a subcommittee. What we do is we take those racial, ethnic minority cases and move them to the subcommittee. We don't discuss them in the overall committee first. And they are testing out social determinants of health forms, I think, in our next meeting. So while they're trying to implement some things, it's just not progressive enough. And it also means that if our administration changes at KDHE, then those things could go away because they're just implemented by those who are currently there. And that is not enough for us to see what these deaths are. We have to be able to also release that data. I've served on this committee for a number of years, and before this bill was introduced, the report that we released every year was accident deaths. And the year that this bill was introduced, there was finally a report released on severe maternal morbidity. That was because we came to you guys. That was because Senator Olathe Foscato came to Senator Hildebrand and said, this needs to be heard. That was because of you guys that small change was made. So if you make the decision to support it today, that means major changes will be made. And I thank Senator Hildebrand for just hearing us out and listening to us, and also for giving us a hearing, because that's going to make changes, but it just won't be enough unless we have them in place for a period of time.
And just one follow-up, Mr. Chair, and I would agree with you as far as how important it is that our chair did have this hearing, because this is the bully pulpit. This is the opportunity to shine light on an issue that didn't just pop up, but it has continued to grow and become a more dramatic disparity.
Yes.
And so that is so crucial. But I guess I'm wondering, when I look at the bill, there is the extension of dates for information to be protected, but there is no specific date that things must be implemented by. So are we needing something more specific so that regardless who is our secretary of KDHE, this work starts getting done?
Yes, we need to set a date. We also need to revise that subcommittee component to include all underserved families, that they get a thorough review. Preventable deaths in the state of Kansas, no matter your race, no matter your socioeconomic status, get a thorough review in our state. So yes, we do need to state that those things are implemented. I will say that the reason those dates are not included is because we would need to work closely with KDHE that's leading the work to make sure that those dates also work for them in implementation.
I think sometimes we need to do it the other way.
Okay.
They've had an opportunity to jump in there and make something happen. Mr. Chair, we have 2 medical schools in this state, a private for-profit and the University of Kansas Medical School, which is funded quite well through the legislature, and that KDHE and the University of Kansas Medical Center can't work to make this move forward quickly, broadly, significantly, is disgraceful.
And we are doing a lot of work at the University of Kansas Medical Center. I will give credit that we have really a strong focus on birth equity in our OBGYN department. We have several things coming down the pipeline, from scholarships to birth equity scholars training to a DEI committee, to reviewing of severe maternal morbidity, just within our hospital to make changes. But we definitely need the state to partner with us and make sure that those changes are statewide. Every family in Kansas doesn't utilize the University of Kansas health system, which is in Kansas City, Kansas. So we're just looking at those cases.
But the leadership for best practices, the reason we know it's not there is because the numbers aren't getting better, the numbers are getting worse. That's how we know we're not on the right path.
Yes, actually, our disparities today for Black women is worse than they were 15 years before the end of slavery. So babies were surviving at a higher rate 15 years before the end of slavery than they are today. And those records are very thorough.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm disappointed that KDHE isn't here today because they've done their written neutral testimony, but if you look over it, it says that their current system of gathering and assessing maternal mortality data is adequate and in line with best practices. They're also suggesting a friendly amendment. So I wish they were here that we could ask them questions as well about what they've done and what they're trying to do. Because I think what our committee is trying to do is kind of wrap our mind around the gap that we're seeing. And again, without them being here, it's hard to understand the current situation, but more of a statement than a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have a question online for Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my question got addressed, but I did want to say thank you so much to all the conferees for providing testimony on this very important topic, and thank you for being here.
Senator Steffen.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, ladies. I do find it very interesting as a anesthesiologist who spent a lot of time doing OB anesthesia. Always loved it. It went from sheer rapture to sheer terror at times, and some of my most astounding stories come from OB anesthesia. It seems to me that, from the academic world, I know the OBGYNs, that maternal morbidity is one of the most studied variables in the history of mankind, and we appear to have a failure to communicate here. There seems to be a breakdown somewhere, and I was very impressed with your discussion on some of the granular disease processes that lead to maternal morbidity and mortality. But then somehow in the bill we make a transition from some of those granular diseases to racial discrimination and some of that. Some of that terminology is very, very problematic for me. As a doula, quick question: do you do your are your deliveries at home?
I do a mix of hospital and home deliveries.
And Sapphire, if you wouldn't mind repeating your name and who you represent when you answer, please. That's okay.
I'm Sapphire Garcia-Lease, and I'm the president and founder of Wichita Birth Justice Society.
Okay, great. Follow up real quick. Yeah, it does appear to me with the incredible wealth of data that is gleaned through the OBGYN societies and the gap in transmission of this information to where the rubber meets the road. And I really feel like assessing why this is going on, it should be very, very simple. And I personally would encourage you all to work with KU, work with the hospitals, and I think you have the resources, and I just don't think you have access to the data. And I think this can be taken care of independently of a bill, but I admire your efforts. But I think what we have here is the proverbial failure to communicate.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Smith, I noticed in some of the testimony from Kansas Action for Children, and you mentioned it, that the first report came out in 2020 on the maternal health review.
No, on severe maternal morbidity.
And that was 2020.
Yeah, Charlotte Smith, KU School of Medicine, Director and Founder of Birth Equity Network. Yes, that was 2020 on severe maternal morbidity.
Okay, and so using that as a baseline, that report that came out in 2020, how will this bill, Senate Bill 42, help to provide more information than what was able to be collected for that report?
Yes, so that report stops at severe maternal morbidity, which then leads to maternal mortality. We could dig deeper into that to identify what is happening around racial disparities, what's happening with the social determinants of health, and then to identify those that lead to deaths. So we still have to review those deaths. This committee reviews, this maternal mortality review committee actually reviews the deaths. So if a person has died of a pregnancy-related complication within that first year, that is what we review. And so that would have to be released in a report. We do not review the maternal morbidity, we review the maternal deaths. And so we would like to see that as a report.
So it's expanding the type of information that you're going to be able to glean from,
Yes.
from the added resources.
Yes.
I did notice that there is no cost related to implementation of this bill, that can be done within current resources and
Yes.
federal funding that's available.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's true. Can I address your questions now?
Just a second, just to clarify, there is a fiscal note of 30,300 for expenditures on this, so there is a fiscal note. Go ahead, and you wanted to reply to a question?
You mentioned the question about collaboration and working together. First, I wanted to thank you for your services as an OB anesthesia. We appreciate you. We know that those things can be difficult, and I want to personally thank you because I received that to have my child. Yes, it's really good stuff. But as far as like collaboration, I agree that we have to collaborate, but we haven't done that to date. And I think that if we continue to have these conversations and lead them back to collaboration, then we'll be back here in 5, 10 years, 30 years having this conversation. We live in Kansas. It's a great state. You guys love it as much as I do. But for 30 years, infants in Kansas have been dying, Black infants have been dying at 3 to 4 times that of white infants. We don't want to have this conversation 30 years from now saying that we need to collaborate and communicate. This isn't a break in communication. This is a break in examination. This is a break in transparency. It's a break in our system, and it's a simple fix. It's a $30,000 fix that is likely already funds that exist. We can make a change, a small change.
Senator Stephan, do you want to respond to that?
I do. Thank you. I wish I had time to tell you some of my OB anesthesia stories. It breaks my heart I don't get to. Maybe later. I'd like for you to elaborate on the lack of transparency statement you made.
Yes. So without the data, there's no transparency. We need to know what the causes are. I think we're here today to say we really want to know what the causes are, which means when we're reviewing maternal deaths as the Maternal Mortality Review Committee, then we go into depth to identify what those deaths, what the causes of those deaths are. What happens in delivery? What happens the year after in the postpartum phase? Why are women dying? Why is there severe maternal morbidity? What are we missing? And what can be changed? What are some small, low-cost changes? We don't know that because we don't have the data, so there's no transparency in the data sharing, in access to the data, in the existing data, or in the reviews to really dig into the social determinants of health.
Thank you. So in the committee, you have access to all the files on the deceased women? You're looking at all those files, and
Yes.
so you have those records?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Last question from Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I sit here and listen to this. Anyone who doesn't know, I'll take another opportunity. This is a very relevant, fresh topic for me. My daughter gave birth Monday. Preeclampsia. At one point, I was in the labor and delivery room with her her blood pressure dropped so rapidly, she was passing out. And it brought to mind that as critical and important as the mother is, during that whole process, it was consideration of mother and, in this case, twins, babies. So I'm wondering if there's going to be correlating information around not just the maternal impact on mothers and their mortality, but as it relates to the infants in these pregnancy situations. And are we keeping an eye on that as well, so that we're keeping, in fact, in my mind, we have 2 people or 3 people that we should be considering in this conversation. So is that part of the discussion as well? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Charlotte Smith, KU, Director of Birth Equity Network. So, Charlotte Smith, KU, Director of the Birth Equity Network. Sorry to hear about that story. We hear that so often of women having these drops in their blood pressure at delivery. Yes, there is a correlation between the maternal morbidity and the infant outcomes. And so, yes, this is going to lead to improved infant outcomes, because we know that this preeclampsia leads to infants having a lower birth weight or being born early, so prematurity. And we can solve that by finding out the causes and continuing that care, changing that care for the mother so that we don't get to that case.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And everything is fine. So it ended on a happy note, but it, it's concerning when you see that happening, and, they're taking care of mom and babies. I just want to make sure that we, treat this as yes, mother, but also the infants and babies. Thank you.
Committee, this concludes our proponent testimony and questions. I will direct your attention to written-only neutral testimony by KDHE. We do not have any opponent testimony. Is there anybody wishing to testify neutral or as an opponent? Not seeing any. This will close our hearing on Senate Bill 42. Bill introductions, Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for accommodating my schedule. I appreciate that. Committee, I have a bill that I'm introducing on behalf of a constituent relating to emotional disability. It is RS 1126.
Committee, you've heard the request for RS 1126 to be introduced as a committee bill. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that'll be introduced. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
Committee, just a reminder, next week we do have hearings all week. The following week, I am planning on hopefully working some bills. I will get a list out hopefully soon of what I'm wanting to work. It will include probably some bills that we actually had hearings on last year as well. So I will get that to you as soon as possible so you can start refreshing yourself on those bills. And there are a couple that we had pulled back that we have some amendments that we need to do or try to put on, look at putting on. So just look, I'm not sure how I'm going to get you the bills. I'll probably announce it next week in a meeting, but we will start working bills the week after. With that, with no further business come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.